came to me last night and he said, if there's anything that I can do to help you. And I said, well, I would like to do a PowerPoint. I'd been told that that was not possible, and he said, oh, we can make that happen. So my thanks to Bob for doing that for us. First of all, I'd like to start off by saying to Chris Stevenson, thank you for allowing me to be part of the program of speakers. He came to me and invited me to do so, and I'm thankful for that. Thankful for Chris laying the opening section of our VBS, and then for Bob and for Scott and their part. And it brings us to the final evening, but to the final story in this particular Vacation Bible School. I dare say that a lot of people think that this story is about Moses, about the children of Israel. And there's some truth to that. But if it's about those people, then how do I use this story in my day-to-day life? Because if this is nothing but a story, we could conjure up any other story. But that's what's unique about the Bible. There will be concepts and principles that will be looked at this evening that if we set out to do so, we can apply those principles in our daily lives and achieve great things. Does God work through humanity today? Yes or no? Because, there's some people that almost act as though He doesn't. That if God is acting, then it's got to be a miracle. But that's not the case. I pray on a regular basis, and I pray for things with the anticipation that God is going to intervene in some way and make those things happen. That doesn't always work out as far as the way that I ask for it to work out. So the story of Moses, and I could almost strangle Johnny because he sang about Noah, and I'm thinking, my phobia all this time has been, you'll say Noah whenever you're talking about water in the Bible. And so thank you, Johnny, for the stress. Yeah. My lesson this evening will be very simple. We will simply read the text in its entirety, 31 verses, so that we have a refreshed memory of what God wanted us to understand. And then we will take section by section in a second trip through to understand certain principles that need to be brought out. And then at the end, or after each section, if anyone has a comment or a question, the floor will be open. I like Bob's format. You raise your hand. If I don't call on you, just say, "Hey, Mr. Bob," and then he can handle it. I must say the struggle is real in my life right now. If you notice, I have 2 sets of reading glasses. These are not prescription glasses. This is a 2.75 that you would pick up at a Walmart or a Dollar General store for close reading, and these are 1.25 that allows me to see a mile away. And I've got glasses coming, but they're just not in yet. So this is interesting. So maybe I can read up here. So if you see me changing around, just realize it's rough. All right, let's get started. I've spent enough time on that type of material. The Bible has a lot to say about this event. has a lot to say in the book of Exodus, chapter 14, which will be the majority of our study. But God wanted this lesson and this story to be shared throughout history. Strangely enough, in 2022, we're talking about it this evening. And I'd like to read a couple of points throughout the Old Testament and New Testament where God wanted that to be preserved in other books as well. This very event that we're talking about will have. You can turn, or you may choose not to, but Joshua chapter 24. Let me make sure. Yes, Joshua chapter 24, verse 6 and 7. The Bible reads, "And I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and ye came unto the sea, and the Egyptians pursued after your fathers with chariots and horsemen unto the Red Sea. And when they cried unto the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and brought the sea upon them, and covered them. And your eyes have seen what I have done in Egypt, and ye dwelt in the wilderness a long season." It's interesting. There it is in Joshua. We go over to Judges, chapter 11, verse 16. "But when Israel came up from Egypt and walked through the wilderness unto the Red Sea and came into Kadesh." We flip over. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 9. "And didst see the affliction of our fathers in Egypt, and heardest their cry by the Red Sea, and showest signs and wonders unto Pharaoh and to all his servants, and on all his people in his land. For thou knewest that they dwelt proudly against them. So didst thou get thee a name as it is this day. And thou didst divide the sea before them, so that they went through the midst of the sea on dry ground. And their persecutors thou threwest into the deep as a stone into the mighty waters. Moreover, thou leddest them in the day by a cloudy pillar, and in the night by a pillar of fire, to give them light in the way where they should go." Then we go over to the New Testament. And we go to the book of Acts, chapter 7, verse 36. "And he brought them out after that they had showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness 40 years. Then we go over to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 29. "By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians essayed to do, and were drowned." I don't know about to you, but that's rather fascinating to me, that this one event, that God has scattered it throughout the Bible as a constant reminder to his people, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. This was a major event. One of the things that I believe made this a major event is God said, "I have been dishonored, and I will get my honor." You remember whenever he said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go"? Who are you that I should let them go? And we will see in our story we're about to read, the thing that it seems like Pharaoh did that really set God off, if you can use those accommodative terms, was he didn't give him the honor he was due. Folks, when we obey the gospel, if we do not give God the honor that he is due, if you think it was rough on Pharaoh, you've seen nothing. Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 26. I will say this and then we'll jump right into our lesson. For if we sin willfully after we have received knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sin, but a certain willful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation which shall devour the adversary. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sore punishment, the word sore is worse, of how much worse punishment, suppose ye, shall he be thought worthy of, who hath trodden underfoot the Son of God, counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and done despite to the Spirit of grace. For we know him that saith, vengeance belongeth to me, I will repay. And again the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. I propose to you here this evening, the same God that drowned Pharaoh's army is the same God that sits on his throne today, and his sons on his right hand side. And when we sin willfully, in Hebrews 10:26 and following, he says that we trodden underfoot. We wipe our feet on his Son and what he did. God will get his honor. So, let's go to Exodus chapter 14, and we will get started. Thank you for allowing me to have that short introduction. If you open your Bible, we really won't go anywhere else other than Exodus 14. So, for some people that don't like jumping around, we're here now. And the Lord spake, starting in verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, against Baal-zephon. Before it ye shall encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariots, and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth and Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marching after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there was no graves in Egypt, thou hast taken us away to die in the wilderness. Wherefore hast thou dealt with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to have served the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show unto you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I, behold, I will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, upon his chariots, upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and a darkness to them, but it gave light by night to thee, so that the one came not near the other all the night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went in the midst of the sea upon the dry ground. And the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, that the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of the fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots, and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remaineth not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea. And the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Every time I'm asked to teach a class, especially downstairs, most of the time up here as well, I want to read the text. Because I believe in Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. For it, the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation. Folks, let me say something. You cannot capitalize on what was just said. If you've come tonight thinking, well, I've read that, and I hope Tim's got something that's going to impress me. Oh, no. No, that was the impressiveness right there. However, let's see if we can flesh this out a little bit as we go along. Well, I was hoping I could do that. That print is not big enough for me, so I'll have to go to my backup version. Hopefully y'all can see that, and I'll go with a different pair of glasses. There we go. In verse 1, I'd like to point out the revelation was by communication. How did God let Moses know what was about to happen? He spoke to him, right? Is that the way God's always revealed to humanity what his plan is? Can anyone just off the cuff think of how God has communicated with humanity other than speaking to them?
Hebrews chapter 1.
God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in times past to the fathers by the prophets, had these last days spoken unto us by his Son. That's speaking though, right? Has God ever revealed something by a dream? Maybe Joseph, butler and the baker. Has God ever communicated by animals? Now that was speaking. So once again, God could have done this any way he wanted to. But in verse 1, he did it by communication, speaking. So he speaks to Moses. And then in verse 2, God communicates through Moses and positions the children of Israel with precision before the sea. This is rather interesting to me because I was thinking today about the beaches of Normandy. Why would I bring this up? Isn't it the high land most of the time where you got the advantage? And if you're at the sea level, that's not the high land. That sea level is about as low as you can go before you go into the water, if I understand sea level correctly. Now, I won't jump too far ahead, but I will point this out. Strategically, Pharaoh is going to say in a few moments, they're in a mess. They're in a pickle. They're trapped deep. They got the sea on one side and the desert's on the other side, and I got these guys. They're in trouble. They're wandering around. They're lost. I want us to notice something. Who put them in that precise location? It was God, right? If we're following God and we wind up in a place that it appears is not in the best scenario, but we're following God, we're fine, folks. The children of Israel are fine right where they are, even though all humanity is saying they are in a mess now. God placed them exactly where they are. Verse 3, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Pharaoh's perception was his own deception. He perceived something, but you know what? It was wrong. And you know what? Pharaoh could not have paid a higher price for this decision. The God that we serve. Wow. If this story, as you study it, I believe that's one of the reasons why it's recounted numerous times. God did not want his people to forget what happened here. Verse 4, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. God is in control, and he will be honored by the miracle soon to come. Egypt will know that God is the Lord, and many others will know that God is the Lord in the future as a result of this story. Question is this story just a story? And I'm afraid it is for too many people. It's just a story. Instead of, it's faith building. If you believe this really happened, and you believe that is your God that did this, how can you face this world carrying out God's will? Oh, you can do so with confidence, folks. If this is my God, I can face anything in the world. Now, the children of Israel, they're going to demonstrate they're scared to death. So let's continue on. I think I've got, yeah. All right. Verse 5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? Kind of odd to me. Does Pharaoh not realize the people are gone? I don't know. I don't have the answer here. According to verse 5, it leaves some suspicion in my mind. Now, you might say, well, why would that be? Well, now, remember, when you're bereaving, a lot of times you're not thinking very clearly. When the children of Israel left, what was happening with Pharaoh? That's right. My wife told me that I could count on you, Joyce. And she said that in a good way. She said, if you need an answer, you ask Joyce. She'll tell you. That's right. But is that the only thing? He's just lost his son. No. As Chris pointed out, his country has been devastated. Has he got so emotionally worked up that he doesn't even know? Like I say, I don't know the answer to that. This gives me reasons to question whether he realized they were gone. Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart concerning letting Israel go from serving the Egyptians. In verse 5, we see that. They've changed their minds now. Now let me say this as a side note. We get ourselves in trouble a lot of times when we get something out of order. Any decision that we make that holds major consequences needs to be done so in this order: the intellect, the will, and then the emotions. Reason I say it gets a lot of people in trouble: a lot of people go emotions, will, and then intellect. Could it be that Pharaoh made this fatal mistake? He got emotional about the death of his child, and he made the statement, leave, go. And now then, they're asking the question, what have we done? Good lesson to contemplate, because we make decisions all the time, and it does need to be done. The intellect, the will. The intellect, as I dissect, here's the reason I'm making this decision. I'm weighing out the options. Yes, this is the right decision. The will is, okay, now that is, I see that that's right, I'm going to move forward. And then the emotion is impulse. Boy, it's got shiny paint on it, and it's a sleek looking car, or as in my case, and I get in trouble if I'm not careful. Here's this beautiful woman, and she smells good, and my wife, and I marry her, and that worked out really good for me, by the way. But anyhow, intellect, will, and emotions. And young people, I know that sometimes y'all think that us older people are silly, but that is really, think about that in your future decisions. The intellect, will, and emotion. Because we're seeing right here, something got out of whack because Pharaoh and his people are saying, what have we done? Verse 6 and 7, and he made ready his chariots and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. I have to admit again, as I'm preparing for this lesson, and I don't read other people's stuff, I believe that if we spend enough time in God's Word, that we can understand. And if we can't understand God's Word. But anyhow, I digress. My point is, and he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots. Well, why do I need to know 600 chosen chariots if he took all the chariots? Wouldn't he took all the chariots suffice? So there's some significance for the 600 chosen chariots. Apparently, these 600 chosen chariots must have been the best of the best. We're making a point. We're not just sending the chariots. I'm telling you, the chosen chariots for emphasis. We are going to get these people, and they're going to pay a price. Verse 6 and 7, Pharaoh and his servants had not realized they were no match for God. However, in due time, they will realize they are no match for God. So, verse 8, and the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. We talked about that the other night. Children of Israel, a high hand can mean several things. It can mean that they go out with a victorious, the plagues, they worked. We're out of there. We didn't want to be in there serving the Egyptians. We're free now. So, all right, a high and mighty hand. It also may be, not only are we leaving Egyptian captivity, but have you looked at the stuff we got back here in the trunk? I mean, we got all kind of wealth that we're leaving with. So, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, still refuses to give in to God's demands by letting people go. However, as the people left Egypt, they left with a confident attitude. I think in the least we can say that they left confident that they were making the right decision. Now remember, children of Israel are human, just like you and I. And today, I may be on cloud 9. I don't know about you. But then sometimes tomorrow, it's like, man, what in the world? And we see this. I believe this is part of the lesson that God is trying to use recounting these stories to us. He's showing us real human nature. He's showing us real human emotions. And he's trying to instill with us, don't allow your emotions to override your faith. Okay? Don't allow your emotions. Too many times we do that. All right. Where's my clicker? Here it is. Verse 9. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea beside Fire-Hiroth and Baal-Zephon. Egyptians pursued after them and found them where God had positioned them, encamping by the sea. Now I'm going to digress just one quick second. This group over here, a lot of them may not remember this. How many of you remember Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner? Do y'all know who I'm talking about over here? Okay. Never failed. I mean, the coyote had it drawn up. He would actually show on the cartoon the diagram how it was going to work. Always failed. I don't know. You're getting an insight into my mind. Whenever I was reading this, it's what came to mind. I'm sitting at the work desk at home. Joni and the girls were over on the couch, and we got some jazz playing, and I said, that's Wile E. Coyote. I mean, he has drawn them right in, and they're thinking, we got it. Well, that was that whole cartoon, every episode. And why you kept watching it, I don't know, because it's the same thing every time. But I'll tell you what, no matter how many times you read this story, the same ending is the same ending. Verse 10, and when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. Verse 10, the children of Israel were afraid and cried unto the Lord. Somebody said that's what it just said. Where's their faith? Did they miss all of these plagues? One moment ago, didn't they go out with a high and mighty hand? And they're so afraid. Wait a minute. Isn't there a cloud in front of them during the day and by fire by night? Moses, he's leading them. They're scared to death. I'm not one that normally does this. Anyone that thinks they're justified in being scared to death or afraid. John, okay.
They had an army pursuing them, and they had the sea in front of them, and they weren't bringing them the mail. You know, there's something to be scared of. Now, in hindsight, we look and say, didn't they know all that God had done for them? But, you know, We know all that God's done for us, but if an army was pursuing us, we'd be scared.
If we were to find ourselves doing God's will today, should we be afraid? Johnny, I'm not going to ask you to sing a song simply for you bailing me out here, but you're right. It's showing the human emotions, but in reality, these people should not be afraid. They are positioned exactly where they're supposed to be. Now, I understand they're human beings. And that's important about this story. Moses is a human being. And this story is dealing with human beings so that since we're human beings, we will encounter the same things. The ultimate question is will we learn from this story so that we're not so afraid? Verse 11, and they said unto Moses, because there was no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us out of Egypt? They said unto Moses, why did you take us out of Egypt? You find that to be an odd question here? Now, as Bob said one time, hold the phone. Didn't the children of Israel cry out to the Lord that they wanted to be freed? Is that just my imagination, or is that factual? Bob, you're saying yeah. Okay. So now then they're asking Moses, why did you free us? Didn't you realize how good we had it in Egypt? We just loved it there. Yeah. And during that meeting, if I remember correctly, I don't remember correctly, they were saying, Moses, no, we don't want to leave. Actually, we love it here. It's wonderful here. And we just want you to leave and leave us alone. No, I don't recall that. In verse 12, is not this the words that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Exodus chapter 2, verse 23 through 25. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed for reason of bondage. And they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. What's this? Exodus 2, 23 through 25 says they were crying out to God. They were groaning. You got to get us out of here, God. Exodus 3, 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt. And I have heard their cries by the reason of their taskmasters, and I know their sorrows. Isn't this interesting? They seem to just be happy as a lark to have been there. Now, I will tell you this, I will take God's rendition of this. God told Moses, the people cried out to me, asking to be released from the bondage. How about you? When things change, do you ever change the story? Change maybe your remembrance of, you see, right now with Moses, it's what have you done? We were happy in Egypt. No, they weren't. Fear is now ruling their thoughts. Yes.
Moses was trying to instill in them trust in Jehovah. He will deliver you from the Egyptians, which he did.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for those comments. And I noticed the clock back there on the wall. It was a sober reminder. And Moses said unto the people, fear ye not. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see again no more forever. Moses said unto the people, fear ye not. They had just witnessed 10 plagues demonstrating God's superiority over Pharaoh and the Egyptians. However, they were about to see the salvation of the Lord like never before. The Egyptians that they see today, they would never see again alive. Oh, at the end, they see them again, but they're dead on the seashore. In 14:30, that is Exodus 14:30, thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. That's whenever I say they saw them again, but they were dead this next time they saw them. Verse 14, the Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. The Lord shall fight for you. This was God's fight. This was not Israel's fight. Notice what God, through Moses, instructed them to do. Stand there and be quiet and observe. Wow. You would think that's pretty easy, except if we bring the human side into this. The Israelites were to stand still and to hold their peace. God had the situation under control. Understand something. Anytime we're doing what God tells us to do, and He tells us in the New Testament, in the Christian age, to do things. Anytime we're doing what God tells us to do, He is under control. Let's not act like the Egyptians. Let's not act like the Israelites. Let's act like the church that trusts and believes that our God is in control. We call that faith. Verse 15, and the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speaking of the children of Israel, that they go forward. What are you doing, Moses? Why are you crying to me? Now, I don't know if this is Moses is crying, or if it's the people are crying, or if the people have cried enough to Moses that Moses is saying, hey, God, I don't know. Whatever your rendition is, I don't know which it is. Because I read nowhere where Moses is actually crying unto God about this. The Lord said unto Moses, why are you acting this way? The Lord said unto Moses, why are the people acting this way? Tell the people to go forward and see the salvation of the Lord. Now, up to this point, go forward is into the sea. So, that's not really an option. But they're about to see where the option becomes really real. Exodus 14:16 through 18. But lift up thy rod and stretch out thine hand over the sea and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. Lift up thy rod, stretch out thy hand over the sea and divide it. Why? God could have already had the sea divided before they arrived. Could He not? Good. This is faith building. This is, I'm bringing you to the edge. There is no way of escape. Here they come. They're going to either take us back and mistreat us, or they're going to kill us. We are doomed. God says, Now it's time to build your faith. He said, lift your rod, stretch out your hand, divide the sea. Children's going to walk on dry ground. Did God have to do those things? Did Moses have to do those things that God just told him to do? Think the sea would have opened up if he had said, God, that won't work. It just won't work. How me lifting the rod in my hand, is that? No. Application for today. Hear, believe. Hear, believe. Repent, confess, and be baptized. Are there human beings that say, no, I'm not going to do that? God is showing us that all along He has used patterns to receive His blessings. And right here's one of them. Dipping 7 times in the river. This concept of doing all that God said has been scattered throughout all the history of God, dealing with humanity. And right here it is again. Moses had to do these things. Verse 17. And I, behold, I will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow after them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon the host, and upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. I will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow after them. Rarely do I ever hear anybody talk about, I hear them talking about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. How many times have you heard people talk about God hardening the Egyptians' hearts? But it's right there, isn't it? There are certain things reserved for God's people that others are to avoid. Boy, that's going to get interesting here in a second. Did the children of Israel have the right to go through the Red Sea on dry ground? They do. Did the Egyptians have that right? Apparently not. Yes, sir.
Many times people will look at these passages of Scripture and they'll say, well, God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, which He did. But they say that He takes away their choice. But if you read closely, it says, the word that Moses spoke to Pharaoh, that's what hardened his heart. The words of the Lord hardened his heart. He had the choice. The Egyptians saw the Israelites, and that's what hardened their hearts. But the Lord used the Israelites in that situation, but the Egyptians still had the choice for their actions.
We're about to see your point exactly, but it's too late. They get into the middle of the sea, and they say, wait a minute. Let's change our plans. Well, if they didn't have a choice, they wouldn't have had that choice to change their mind. Problem is, they changed their mind, and it was too late. Now, I'm going to beat myself up for this. There's people today that will change their mind, and it will be too late. Today is the day of salvation. There's people putting stuff off. Oh, I'm going to get back faithful one day. Okay. These people realized too late they made a fatal error. So thank you for pointing that out. That yes, they did have a choice, and they demonstrated that too late. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh and his chariots and his horsemen. 18. 19. And the angel of God which went before the camp of Israel removed and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went before their face and stood behind them. Isn't this a beautiful picture? God's leading them, and at the point He's led them as far as they can go up to that point, now He's protecting them. He stands between them and the enemy. The enemy was not coming close. God is in control. Verse 20, and it came to pass, and it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and a darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these. Darkness to the Egyptians, light to the Israelites, so that one came not near the other all night. Isn't it interesting? 1 John talks about light and darkness. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. If we walk in darkness, who's the good guys here? The Israelites, right? Who's the bad guys? The Egyptians. Who's in the light? The good guys. Who's in the darkness? The bad guys. The harmony of the Scriptures are mind-boggling. I'm having to hurry up here. 21 and 22, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on the right hand, on their left. Verse 19, God was fully aware of where the danger of the enemies was, and it was not the sea. Therefore, the angel of God moved back to the back of them. So God is always aware of our situation. He was in theirs, and he is in ours. Verse 20, the Egyptians and the Israelite came not near one another all night. The Egyptians were in darkness, the Israelites were in the light. Verse 21 and 22, so many questions that I have here. It's okay, isn't it, to wonder things? Children of Israel are walking on dry ground through the Red Sea. I don't know this to be even factual or anywhere close. I was curious. I looked up a few things. Some speculate where the children of Israel went through the Red Sea, that the depths would have been down to 2,500 feet below sea level. Is that true? Wouldn't have a clue. Wouldn't have a clue. I do know one thing. When the Egyptians went in and the water collapsed on them, it wasn't ankle deep, folks. None of them survived. But here's the questions that I've got. We don't have the answers, but it just shows my mind process whenever I was looking at this. Was this like the Georgia Aquarium? How many's ever been to the Georgia Aquarium? You walk through the tube and you're looking around and you can see the light. I don't know. Was it that way? If it was, would that have been neat? You know, water is transparent. You can see through it. Did anyone, surely nobody would do this, did anyone say, I want to touch it? I don't know. So many questions, we just don't have time for Bob to answer them for us. Yes?
You know, Bob showed us a DVD of that movie, The Ten Commandments, the other night. It's typical Hollywood. As I recall, I watched that as a kid years ago. But as I do recall, when they were walking across the Red Sea, I saw mud holes all over the place, like puddles, which that's typical Hollywood. They're going to try to stretch it to have some kind of dramatic effect. But if it says dry land, it's dry land.
Yeah, I watched that as well, and I said to my wife, she was sitting there, and I said, wait a minute, Moses is going up on the mount to die, and he's leaving Aaron and Miriam. If you know the Bible, they've been dead. So yeah, Hollywood, just be careful watching Hollywood. All right. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses and his chariots and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord looked upon the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels. You remember a moment ago when God said that he would fight for the children of Israel? He's physically doing this. He is removing the chariot wheels from off the chariots, that they drave them heavily. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them." Much to your point earlier. What is your name again? Amos? Reagan, excuse me. Amos is your dad, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, Reagan, much to your point, they had a choice. Here it is. Pharaoh had a choice too. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Can you imagine Moses seeing this host of people coming? And it is his gesture that cost all of them their life. Difficult. Difficult. 28, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all Pharaoh, all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. When the Lord's Supper tray is passed, is it for anybody that wants to partake of it? No. The individual that is not showing the Lord's death until he comes, it's not for you. If you want to sit there and think about things other than what you're supposed to, the Lord's death, be well served not to take it. Corinthians says you eat and drink damnation to your soul. These people did not have the right to engage in the activity they engaged in, and they paid the price. We're taught that. It's inexcusable to say, well, now, I thought I could do anything I wanted to. God preserved this through numerous books, this story, to show, no. You're not entitled to everything that God has for his children. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall on them on the right hand and on the left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. 29, God is faithful. 30, God is faithful. 31, God received his honor. That's what he said earlier. I will receive my honor. I would love to tell you that as the story goes on, verse 31 remained intact. But we get to a place called Mount Sinai, and the people want to go back to Egypt. Let us build a golden image, and we want to go back to Egypt. We live in a world today where people one day are one way, and a couple of days later, have changed that position. We see that with these people. May it never be said of 1 Peter chapter 2 of a Christian. For it had been better for them never to have known the way of righteousness than after they have known it to turn again from the holy commandments delivered unto them. For it has happened to them according to the true proverb, the dog has returned to his own vomit again, and the sow that was washed to her wallowing in the mire. Folks, we may not go back to Egypt, but there's a ton of people that the Lord saved that then wants to go back to the proverbial Egypt. I hope you've learned something from the lesson. I hope it's been beneficial, and thank you for your kind attention. Is there any questions or comments at this time? Bob.
Talked about the people moving forward, but the people were in a camp. Now, we are God's people, the church. Okay, we can't just camp out where we're at. The church must move forward. What does that mean? Well, we need to make sure our families are together. We need to make sure our marriages are good. We need to take the gospel. But we also need to confront the culture that we are in and not be intimidated. The kingdom of God. Now, we are lucky here in the West Georgia area because the churches, we kind of like each other, so that's a good thing, okay? But we can do more, and we must do more. The church must move forward.
Great comment. Yes, sir.
The Israelites made the choice to leave Egypt, and so then when they made their choice and they saw things getting a little different, they wanted to put the blame on someone else, namely Moses. Why'd you bring us out? So when we make choices in our lives, especially in marriages, we need to make that choice and stick to it and move forward. It's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, but we made that choice. And so we need to move forward. When we make the choice to follow Christ, we need to move forward as well.
Interesting comment about marriage, because Matthew 19:9, Jesus teaches about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And the next verse, his disciples said, Lord, if such be the case, in other words, if what you just said is true, it's not good for men to marry. So yes, we need to stick to our vows and commitments. You're exactly right. Anybody else? All right, I've gone 5 minutes over, but you've been a great audience. Thank you.